Welcome to the Sweaty Pillow podcast. I am so excited to share a very special guest, a conversation today with Dr. Sarah Berry, and I'm going to read Sarah's very impressive biography. Sarah is joining us today from London in the UK, not to be confused with London, Ontario. So this is really special. Sarah is Chief Scientist of ZOE, which is a science and nutrition company. Sarah is also a professor of nutritional sciences at King's College in London. Welcome, Dr. Berry. Thanks for joining us. We're so excited to have you here.
Oh, Lara, thank you very much for having me.
So, right off the bat, can you please share with us your story, your background? How did you get into this really special, important line of work?
Yeah, so I've actually spent 25 years as a nutrition scientist at King's College London, where I've spent most of my time researching the relationship between diet and cardiovascular disease in very small randomized control clinical trials where I feed people very specific foods and I look at hundreds of different kind of metabolites and chemicals and look at how the foods change them. And so I've run during my career about 30 randomized control trials. Now, interestingly, apart from one of them, they've all been in men. They've been in men because men, dare I say it, and please don't shoot me down until you listen to the rest of this podcast, everyone. They're easier to study. And the reason they're easier to study is because we as scientists don't have to consider the stage of the menstrual cycle. We don't have to consider, are they pre, peri, or postmenopausal? So at a time where it's so difficult to get funding for research and we're trying to keep costs down as much as possible and be really competitive, we're like, right, what's the cheapest way we can do this as scientists? We need to keep down the number of people that we study. Let's just recruit men. It means we can reduce the numbers because we don't have to also take into account all of these other factors. So what's been a huge change for me is about 7 years ago, I was one of the founding scientists as part of ZOE, who are a science healthcare company. And we're a company that are studying individuals' responses to food at a scale that's just never been done before, and hundreds of thousands of people. And this is so exciting for me when I've actually been traditionally doing these studies with like 20, 30 people who are all men. And so we are collecting a phenomenal amount of data now on women. So in amongst our hundreds of thousands of people, we've got about 60 to 70% of these participants are women who we're collecting a breadth of data at this scale, at a depth and precision that's just never been done before. And so we started about 3-4 years ago diving into all of this data. And we started seeing, whoa, we see a big difference in how people respond to food, as well as all these other kind of factors related to diet, lifestyle, and health, dependent on your menopause status. Now, I'm sure to you, who's an expert in this area as well, that will seem obvious. But for me, who'd worked in as many academics in this really narrow area before and not really caring about differences between men and women, that was a real kind of, a kind of like light bulb moment. And so since then, over the last few years, we've really been doing a deep dive now into the data that we've got. And every time we do some new analysis, it's just like overwhelming the differences we see depending on menopause status in whatever the outcome that we're looking at is.
Unbelievable. I just love the real importance that you place on data, and the numbers that you guys have accumulated as part of your studies are really impressive. So, what are you seeing in the research for women and, diet and metabolism, etc.?
Yeah, so we've looked across two kind of broad areas, and this is how I like to break down the menopause science. We've looked in relation to symptoms, but we've also looked in relation to disease risk factors. And so we've been publishing research in those kind of two broad areas. So in our first study, which was quite a tightly controlled study where we had 1,000 individuals. This was called the ZOE Predict 1 study. We did a real deep dive into how people respond to food. We did a deep dive into how their post-meal blood sugar changes, their inflammation changes, their blood fats change, all which we know are independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease and some other chronic diseases. But we also looked as well how, depending on your menopause status, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your insulin sensitivity was different. And that's kind of the first body of work that we've done. But what we've been doing now in the study, where we have a couple of 100,000 people, is now really honing in on symptoms and how diet and lifestyle impacts the symptoms. And I'm really happy to dive into both of those studies if you'd like me to.
I would love, would love. I'm just hanging on every word, and so will our community members.
Oh, thank you. So the first study we did in 1,000 individuals, we were able to separate out our pre, peri, and postmenopausal women. And what we did first was look at, well, how do they differ in terms of really key health-related factors, like blood pressure, like cholesterol, like visceral adiposity, so the amount of fat you've got around, your tummy area, for example. How do they differ depending on menopause status, but how do they differ according to sex as well? How different are they to men? And what we found was that up until the menopause, or up until perimenopause, men and women were very different, as we know. So men had, at any given age, slightly higher blood pressure, slightly higher bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, slightly higher visceral adiposity, and so forth. Then as soon as you got to perimenopause, suddenly women, jumped up. So if you can imagine this line where they're quite far apart, suddenly they jumped up, and in some of these, they actually overtook men. So in some of these factors, for example, blood pressure, suddenly their blood pressure was even higher than men. And, other studies have shown this as well, but it was really nice to see this replicated in our cohort. But what was a really interesting area for us that hasn't been looked at enough in the past was looking at how we respond to food. So what we know is when you eat a meal, you have a short-term change in circulating blood sugar or blood glucose from the carbohydrate in the meal, which peaks around 30 minutes after you've eaten the meal, returns to baseline around 2 hours. And then you have a change in circulating blood fat, which we call triglycerides in the blood, coming from the fat that's in the meal, and that peaks around, returns to baseline around 8 hours. Now, the reason this is important is because imagine how most people eat. They main meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Many people eat snacks. So in the UK and the US, on average, we eat 2.5 snacks a day. So we're eating 5 to 6 eating events a day. So imagine you've got these kind of peaks and troughs throughout the day in your glucose, in your blood fat. It means you actually spend most of the day in what we call this postprandial state, this post-eating state. And we know that those peaks in circulating glucose and circulating fat are independent risk factors for disease. And we wanted to see, well, hold on, do people differ depending on their menopause status in these short-term changes? Because most people have looked at these long-term changes in women. Very few people have looked at short-term changes. And because we know that they're independent risk factors for disease, and because the strength of the association, is continually emerging, we wanted to do a deep dive into this. And so we fed our 1,000 individuals a high fat, high carbohydrate meal, and then we measured every 15 minutes how their blood sugar changed, how their blood fat changed, how their inflammation changed. And what we saw is, depending on whether you were premenopausal, perimenopausal, or postmenopausal, was hugely different. And so we saw if you were peri or postmenopausal, you had a really exaggerated blood sugar response to the meal compared to if you were premenopausal. You had a higher blood fat response to the meal, and you had a high inflammatory response to the meal, showing that you're not processing it, in quite the same way as you were when you were premenopausal. And then, Lara, I think where it got really exciting for me as a researcher is obviously an age-related event. So how do we tease apart, well, what's the effect of age versus what's the effect of, the menopause? But because we had a large cohort, what we could do is we could take an age-matched subgroup. So we could take a subgroup of individuals who were the same age, some of who were premenopausal and some of who were either peri or postmenopausal, and see, okay, do we still see these differences? And we still saw a significant difference in the blood sugar response to a standard meal, depending on whether you are pre or postmenopausal, even if we age match the individuals.
So that is, I'm gobsmacked because how you just described it so well. And there's been anecdotal, um, I've heard everything from you have to eat 300 calories less when you're postmenopausal if you want to maintain the same weight. I mean, just anecdotal little nuggets. But as you break down the science, if I'm premenopausal, 40 years old, and I have fettuccine carbonara, I can't have it every day, but I'll basically digest it and I'll, get on my treadmill the next day and life is better. Postmenopausal or in perimenopause, if I'm eating the same fettuccine carbonara, how my body responds from a health risk factor is night and day. Am I synthesizing that
Yeah, I think
properly?
I'm always, yes, I think you are. I think as a cautious scientist, and academic
Yes.
scientists are the most cautious. I probably wouldn't say night and day. I'd probably say mid-morning and lunchtime. Would say,
I love that.
yes, yes, there's a difference, but I wouldn't say that, it's something we need to be mindful of. And I think it's
Mm,
the size of the difference. And this is really important in nutrition science. We always think, how big is the difference? And
mm,
therefore, how big, how big an impact does it have on your life? And does it warrant making changes for it? So what I would say is, yes, as a postmenopausal woman, I would be more mindful about the amount of carbohydrate, or rather the type of carbohydrate, so avoiding too
mm.
much refined carbohydrate. But I wouldn't say that the size of the difference is so much that you've got to totally cut down all of your
Okay,
carbohydrate.
fair. But the what you got me on was the inflammatory response in
Mm.
these short-term measures is a concerning issue, which drives disease. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we know that these post-meal increases in circulating blood sugar and circulating blood fat may be unfavorable for our health is because we know they initiate kind of a cascade of downstream effects that
Mm,
ultimately results in inflammation. Now, inflammation is a normal physiological response, as is increases in blood
mm,
sugar and increases in blood fat after a meal. It's normal. Our body is made to be able to handle this. Our body's really, really clever to be able to handle these kind of stresses. But if it's repeated and excessive, that's where it becomes a problem.
mm,
And so, given that we live in this food environment that is pretty rubbish, with heavily refined carbohydrates,
yeah.
loads of sugar, low in fiber, low in plant diversity, the kind of foods that we're eating are already putting us at a disadvantage. And then overlaid with that is the fact that if you are peri or postmenopausal, you're going to have an even bigger response as well. So it's kind of, the perfect storm of all our food landscape, our
Mm,
biology, our hormones.
interesting. I over the course of time on interviewing doctors, including cardiac specialists or menopause specialists or OBGYNs, it's so multifactorial, all the issues that plague us during menopause. And, you non-scientists, and we sit around the table with our fatty foods and our rosé, and we just complain about how we're not sleeping, our skin, our tummies, all of the things. But it's really so scientific in terms of the nutrition that you're putting in your body independent of not sleeping contributing to us craving more sugar. It really is, so we can make an impact on our health through nutrition is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think we should take, the kind of findings that we have as kind of a call to action, or rather a powerful findings, that we know that, yes, as we enter menopause, we have increased risk of disease. We have increased risk of cardiovascular disease, for example, type 2 diabetes, because of these hormonal changes, because estrogen impacts every cell in our body, et cetera, et cetera. But the good news is you can do something about it. So we know diet has the power to reduce your bad cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol. We know diet has the power to reduce your blood pressure. We know diet has the power to reduce your inflammation. It's not going to totally stop it. It is a
Yeah.
natural part of aging. It's a natural part of menopause. But you can use dietary modifications to help reduce some of the changes that are a natural part, of menopause. But I think where it gets really difficult is this change that you have in the visceral adiposity. So the weight around the tummy. We know that one of the benefits of estrogen is, in simple terms, it directs the fat to our hips, and we know fat around our hips. So we often talk about pear-shaped. In the UK, I don't know if you use the same terminology, pear and
We do,
apples in
yeah.
the US. You do, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, we know that pre-menopause, we're pear-shaped because the estrogen is directing the fat to our hips. It has a kind of more protective role. Once we lose the estrogen, then our fat is directed more to our abdominal area. Hence why we see in our own research, and other studies have shown that, you're 3 to 4 times more likely to have central adiposity. So basically lots of fat around your belly if you're postmenopausal compared to premenopausal. This is where it becomes tricky because, one, estrogens, you've no longer got the estrogen helping you out here. You've also got all of these other problems, like you've mentioned, you've got the symptom side of things. So you've got the poor sleep, that you might feel depressed, you might feel anxious, less motivated to exercise. So you kind of got this double whammy. And, it's really tricky because it all kind of feeds into each other. So, for example, we know that if you sleep badly, you tend to have a higher blood sugar response to a meal the next day. We also know if you sleep badly, the reward centers in your brain are kind of heightened. So they'll be saying, Lara, you've had a bad night's sleep. Go get a quick fix. Go and get some nice, refined carbohydrates, a pastry, or, that quick fix. You'll have that. Firstly, you're going to have a higher blood sugar response to it because you've had a bad night's sleep. Forget whether you're menopausal or not, but because you've had a bad night's sleep, you'll have a higher blood sugar response. You're more likely to have a dip. So you start on this roller coaster, because we also know that dips in blood glucose means that you'll want to eat your next meal, more sooner. You'll have more calories at your next meal, etc. So you're on this kind of roller coaster. And so you've got, again, it's this perfect storm. You've had that crap night's sleep. Your body's saying, come and have this quick fix. You're not responding well to it. You're more predisposed to put weight around your belly, to put it on anyway. You're less inclined to do physical activity. And so I know I'm painting a pretty doom and gloom picture. I'm in a way that I think, yes, there's lots we could do, but we also need to be quite gentle on ourselves, because it's kind of like stacking the odds against us. And I think, trying to have a belly like, Jennifer Lopez or Halle Berry, which I would love to have, the reality is, unless you're going to deny yourself continuously of every pleasure, it's probably unlikely we're ever going to achieve that.
Right. It's interesting. We have such a lengthy years of service to menopausal women, and it was only in the last year we wanted to give them more access to resources and support and information, which is why we launched the Sweaty Pillow. And we did some research with our base of consumers who are menopausal women and asked them what are the most important topics that either A, they can't get proper information from their primary care physician, or what's on their mind or what bothers them the most. And number one was sleep issues, but number two was weight management and just generally speaking, how their body is looking and feeling, and a little bit around the energy, but why am I gaining weight? So there's the health risk factors, which are scary, which we're not paying enough attention to, but there's just this general anxiety around, do I have to starve myself? What do I have to do so that I'm not upping dress sizes every year? So do you have a bit of a formula for us to take away on what and how we should be eating?
So I think, you said something really interesting, Lara, before I get into kind of the practicalities about weight maintenance, metabolism, that being one of the key priorities. We also, as part of our research, did a survey in 70,000 peri and postmenopausal women, asking them about their symptoms. So what symptoms do they have? And also what's the impact that these symptoms have on their quality of life? And it's really interesting because the symptom that people said was most impactful on their quality of life was the weight gain and slowed metabolism. And yet I had always thought, just because this is what I often talk about as a perimenopausal woman with my friends, oh, it's going to be sleep, it's going to be brain fog or memory. So it's really interesting that this is something that's coming through in your research. As scientists, we love consistency. We love to see the same things coming through in different studies. So
Right.
I think that, it is difficult because you have this perfect storm of changes in mood, changes in sleep, changes in how you metabolize food. I think that there are, practical things you can do that apply at all stages in life in terms of really trying your best to have high quality diet, diverse plants, low in refined carbohydrates, low in ultra processed food, high in healthy fats, and so forth, trying to keep physically active, etc. But there's also things that we can do to think about how we're eating our food as well. And I think this gives us kind of extra tools in the toolbox. So, for example, we know that the time of day that we eat our food matters. So, we know on average you have a higher blood sugar response if you eat food earlier in the day compared to later in the day. We also know if you eat foods later in the day that you tend to feel more hungry the next morning. And we also know if you eat foods later in the day, it's associated with lots of unhealthy risk factors like higher blood pressure, inflammation, cholesterol, etc. What we find with our research is this time of day effect seems to be even more pronounced if you're postmenopausal. So I would recommend to anyone, try not to eat after 8 or 9 at night. If you like your cake or your pastry, try and have it in your mid-morning break rather than your afternoon break. But I would emphasize that even more for postmenopausal women, given that we see from our own research that's recently was published at the American Society of Nutrition last month, that postmenopausal women have an even higher or more exaggerated time of day effect, meaning that if they were to have their cake in the morning versus the afternoon, they would have a lower blood sugar response. But the difference is more pronounced depending on whether you're postmenopausal or premenopausal.
Really, my brain is on overload right now because I go right into, okay, Lara, what am I going to grocery shop for tonight so I can eat better this weekend? And now the timing of it is so fascinating. So if in a perfect world, you're sitting with your girlfriend, who's me in this moment because I want to be friends, and you tell me exactly what I should eat and when I should eat Saturday tomorrow when I wake up. Just a little sample of your optimum daily routine.
Yeah, well, first, and I'm sorry, this is the boring scientist in me. I first would never tell someone what they should eat. Um, uh,
Suggest.
because it depends on your own personal preference. And do you know what I would say, Lara? First and foremost, what do you like to eat? Food is there to bring us
Hmm,
pleasure, to bring us joy. It's
right.
connected with our emotions, our social life, our culture. And I do worry that in our kind of quest to be healthy, we forget that. So it depends on what you like to eat. I do think a
Fair.
good day would look like a breakfast that, if you like to eat breakfast, that is. So actually, a first point is listen to how hungry you are. So
Hmm.
listen to your hunger signals. Oh, it's so clever. It tells us when we're hungry. Don't eat just out of habit. We know that 30% of snacks that are eaten are out of habit rather than people are actually hungry. Anyway, I've digressed. But I would
No, I
say
love that.
start the
I love
morning
that. Yeah.
with, thank you. Start the morning with a meal or breakfast that is as diverse as possible in plant-based foods, that has plenty of protein, healthy fats and fiber. So avoid the refined carbohydrates. So you're setting yourself up not on this kind of roller coaster of
Mm.
blood sugar, but you're setting yourself up by having something that's going to keep you full for longer, that's not going to give you these big sugar spikes and troughs that set you up in a way that I don't think is conducive, particularly for postmenopausal women, to a good day of eating. And so the kind of thing I would suggest, if I was going to say, okay, here's what I would suggest you have for breakfast, is maybe some kefir or Greek yogurt with lots of mixed berries and mixed nuts and seeds, which means that you're getting some probiotic. And we know that that's really important, because we know that actually the gut microbiome seems to be different between post or premenopausal women. And actually, in our own research, we found that the gut microbiome partly mediates the effect that diet has on some of the health outcomes we've looked at, like inflammation. And so maintaining a healthy microbiome that resembles your microbiome that you had when you were premenopausal is really important, we believe, although there's lots more research to do on this. So having something like kefir, which is a probiotic, or any kind of yogurt that's feeding your gut microbiome, having that mixture of nuts and seeds that are giving you lots of healthy fiber, healthy proteins, healthy oils, and a diversity of phytochemicals. And by phytochemicals, I mean these like bioactives, like polyphenols, that we know have these wonderful properties in terms of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant stress. Then I would say that the other practical tip would be slow down the rate that you're eating. And this is regardless of whether you're pre, peri, or post. There's some fantastic research that's coming out of a group based in the Netherlands, and that we've actually been doing some research on as well, showing that we're eating our food too fast now. We're eating our food rushed, whether it's on a Zoom call or before, like I did. I had 10 minutes before I came on this podcast to quickly, gobble down my lunch. And we've changed how we're eating our food. So we are eating it too fast. But what we know is that if you can reduce the rate that you eat your food by about 20%, okay, so if you typically eat it in maybe 10 minutes, just extend it to eating it in 12 minutes. What we know is just by changing it by 20%, you can reduce your energy intake by 15%. This is what randomized controlled trials show. And this is a tip I'm giving on the basis that we know for many women, the weight gain is a problem. For women who don't want to lose weight, then obviously this isn't applicable to them. But I love this because it's like saying, okay, here's a really great healthy breakfast. And in addition to that, why don't you try and reduce down the rate at which you're eating it as well? So that's one
Check. That's great. Love that.
Okay. So eat your breakfast more slowly tomorrow. Then I'd say, look, if you want to snack and you are typically a snacker, our research, and again, we've published recently on this, our research shows as long as it's a good quality snack, so I mean kind of, nuts, fruits, vegetables, those sorts of things, or rather snacks that aren't high in refined carbohydrates, there's no unfavorable effect, we believe, in long-term health. And there's very little relationship between snack intake and energy intake if it is from healthy snacks. So if you fancy a mid-morning snack, fine, go for something healthy, ideally nuts. Again, we've done a clinical trial showing that if you snack on nuts rather than typical UK, US snacks, you can actually reduce your cholesterol, reduce your blood vessel damage really significantly. So the kind of changes that are happening post-menopausally, you can try and negate some of those. So I'd say, yeah, go for nuts every day for your snacks. And then lunch, I'd follow the same principles as breakfast. Having a lunch that's packing in the fiber, as much plant diversity as you can, trying with different kind of plants, packing in healthy oils. A mistake I think lots of people make is, fat's high in calories, I must eat low fat. That's the worst thing you could possibly do in order to reduce weight. Carbohydrates just don't fill you up in the way or the long way that fat and protein will. So I'd be really careful opting during your lunch for kind of low fat options or reduced fat options, because you'll just end up wanting to eat your next meal sooner and potentially more calories than the next meal. Afternoon, again, if you want an afternoon snack, go for the nuts, that kind of plant-based snack. And then dinner, again, going for the same principle: healthy proteins, healthy fiber, healthy oils. And not eating after
Love
8
it.
p.m. if possible.
Those are very tangible takeaways and easy. Like I revert to myself and my girlfriends who are such a kind of focus group for some of the work that we do here, but it's doable. Now I'm reverting back to some of the other data that you shared in terms of the timing of when you eat. So if I can't get through my Saturday without having a scone, that should be in the morning, not at 7:45 p.m.
Yeah, so in an ideal world, yes, if you really do like a scone or a cake, try and have it earlier in the day than later in the day. Eating highly refined carbohydrates later in the day, we know you'll have a bigger blood sugar response. There's evidence show eating later in the day, you'll actually wake up feeling more hungry, and it also impacts our metabolic control as well. So
Mm,
yes, I would eat early in the day. It's not going to have a huge impact. So again, I'm going back to that kind of size effect and being that cautionary scientist. But this is why I think it's a case of looking at all the different strategies and thinking, okay, what actually has the minimal impact on my life? I.e., I think we can all slow down how quickly we eat our food without it
mhm,
impacting our lives.
mhm,
I think many of us could try and just finish our last eating event, whether it's a snack or our dinner, that little bit earlier in the evening without it having a big impact, even if it was 15, 20 minutes earlier. If, though, you really like your scone in the afternoon because that's how you have it with your friends with a cup of tea, then don't make that change because it's not going to transform your life. But if
mhm,
actually it doesn't really matter to you, then yes, have it earlier in the day.
mm. Well, these are so compelling between your data and how you deconstructed a bit for us. I know I put you on the spot on, okay, wait, how should we go do this? But I'm appreciative because our community craves the data and the science. That's what's so desperately missing. So you've done an amazing job of relaying that. Your research is so compelling. I can't wait to get my hands on more. So Dr. Sarah Berry, thank you so much for this conversation today. I've learned a ton and I can go make small, manageable changes in my life for a better quality of life.
Our pleasure. It's been great to chat to you. And you know, we've got so much more exciting research coming out soon. So we'd be really happy to come back and talk about all of that.
I would love that so much. Thank you. It was so great to meet you.
Thank you.